Hi, and welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. Birth stories, birth education, and the pursuit of surrendering it all to God. Let's get started. Well, hey everybody. We are in for a unique and rare episode today because this is a solo episode. I will almost always have a guest on with me, but today, since the podcast is new and most of you don't know who I am, I just wanted to share my personal story of transformation over the years of how I went from a mainstream medical patient to a more holistic, naturally minded birth worker. So yeah, let's jump in. So when I got pregnant with my first daughter, I was definitely a completely different person than I am today. First of all, I was highly phobic of needles and blood and doctor's offices and hospitals and all of the things, which is ironic that I ended up choosing to deliver in a hospital. Although at that time, I didn't realize there was a choice. I thought that was the only place you could deliver was a hospital. I had heard whisperings of birth center or home birth or stuff, but I didn't think that was an actual option, nor did I realize why anyone would want to do that, as I was also extremely afraid of pain and had an extremely low pain tolerance. So it just didn't seem like the option for me. I knew I wanted an epidural. I knew I didn't want to feel anything. So that's kind of where I was. And that's how my first birth went. I went to an OBGYN. I did everything they told me to. Literally everything, I think, except getting the flu shot. I was like, oh, optional vaccines? No, thank you. I don't want any extra needles in my body. But I did it all, and I didn't really think twice about it. I remember before I had her, the first person I ever met who told me kind of off the cuff, I was at her house one day, that she didn't vaccinate her children and that the Lord told her not to vaccinate her children. And this was several years ago. This was over a decade ago. I was literally in my head, I was like, what? This woman is crazy. She doesn't vaccinate her kids. Does she want them to die? like a typical mainstream person response. Now, I didn't say that out loud to her. I just thought it in my head and kind of nodded along. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. And, but that's what I thought. I was just like, okay, well, this woman is crazy. Let me keep my space from her. But, the Lord humbles us, right? So after my daughter's birth, I started realizing that people did things differently, that not everybody in the world did things exactly like I did, or exactly like what their doctors told them to do. And I wanted to know why. I was hearing more birth stories from other birth worker friends, even though I wasn't a birth worker yet. And I just became really intrigued. Why? Why would these people want to deliver without pain medication? Why would they want to deliver at home? Why would they want to deliver at a birth? I just didn't understand. And so I just kept listening to more stories, kept asking more questions, and the Lord was really growing a passion for birth inside of me, a huge passion. He had planted a seed, and he continued to water it over the coming months. By my daughter's first birthday, I was hooked on birth and decided that I wanted to become a birth doula myself, and I dove in head first. I mean, the day I decided, I was asking my doula friends, okay, what do I do? And they're like, okay, watch this, read this, read this. And then, of course, I went and looked up all of what I needed to do to get certified and where I was going to be certified and all the requirements. And I went for it. So at that time, I was staying at home with my daughter, and she was still napping a couple times a day. So I spent all of that time reading all of the required books. I would watch birth documentaries and birth shows after she went to bed at night. That's when I discovered Called Midwife, and it officially became my favorite show and still is to this day, by the way. And I signed up for my in-person training course. I also started attending births as a shadowing doula. I was a doula in training, and so I went to shadow with other doulas, and I actually got all of my requirements in the first 6 months, which is pretty fast. So being in the birth world, I just got to meet a lot of great people and hear a lot of really cool stories of faith and stories of life. And I realized soon that a lot of people especially people who were hiring a doula, they were living a slightly different lifestyle than I had been living. I'll never forget going to a client's house for her prenatal, and I learned all about what a Berkey water filter was and why it was important, and why eating organic food was legitimately important, and why I might not want to trust the government. And honestly, up until that point, I didn't pay much attention to politics at all. At the time, I didn't understand why these clients were so riled up about it. But let's just say I do now. But I just remember that experience, like thinking like, why are these people so paranoid? They're really great people and they really love Jesus. And so I did trust them, and I did, really like them. I just had never heard any of that before. So anyways, I also, having had become a doula and meeting all these people and doing lots of research, I knew I wanted to do things differently for my second birth. And so I ended up having my second at a birth center, natural birth, which was hard. And you'll hear about that story later in the podcast. You'll hear all my birth stories, actually. But it was good. It was a really good experience for me. And anyways, during that pregnancy, I'd also read the vaccine book by Dr. Sears, which I wouldn't recommend anymore, but it was a good starting point for me to realize there was at least something to look into there. And so I decided to spread out my second's vaccinations. My first one, my daughter, she got CDC schedule vaccines, like her whole up through kindergarten. But my second, my son, I decided to spread them out. And my pediatrician that I was seeing at the time was willing to work with me, but she wanted to compromise. She didn't ever want him to be more than like 2 months behind, quote unquote, on any certain shot. It was more visits to the doctor to not get them all at once, but I felt like spreading them out was at least a step in the right direction. And that's really all I thought I needed to do at the time. Then I got pregnant with my third child, another son. And during that pregnancy, we had an experience at our pediatrician's office that I will never forget. So my daughter, who was 4, almost 5 at the time, she had gotten a rash around her eye, and she had a fever, and she had thrown up all within like a day or two. She just didn't seem right. She was acting pretty lethargic. So I took her in, and I usually, it takes a lot for me to take a child to the pediatrician, even back then. But it just, something wasn't sitting right with me. I was like, something's going on with her, and I want to get help figuring out what it is. So when I got there, my pediatrician, who she had seen since she was born, and who I had really liked, especially like as a person, she was very, very chill and made me feel really relaxed, which I think for a first-time mom was really good. But she literally said that it was 3 different things, like completely unrelated to each other, and that it was just, quote unquote, a coincidence that they all happened at the same time. So she wrote me multiple prescriptions for her symptoms. She said the rash was likely poison ivy. It was December, by the way, and my daughter is not a nature girl. I'll just tell you that, even though I really want her to be, she's not. And she said it could be like some type of contact rash. So she wrote us this steroid prescription to get rid of it. She said the fever was likely a UTI, even though we hadn't tested this yet and she had no UTI symptoms. But for some reason, she was convinced it was a UTI, and she wrote us a prescription for an antibiotic. Then she said the throwing up was like either, a stomach bug or something she ate, and that she could have an anti-nausea medication, like a prescription for one. And I'm like, what? None of this sat right with me. I just did not feel like she was looking at her as a whole person. Like instead, she was just matching pills to symptoms. So we got home. I did not feel right in my spirit about what was going on. So I called my husband because he was at work, and I said, hey, this is what she said. It doesn't feel right to me. Like, what should we do? And so he had a picture of her rash, and he sent it to one of his friends who was a doctor, who was like a family physician, and got a second opinion. And immediately that doctor was like, what did that pediatrician say? Like, don't let her take that medicine. Don't fill those prescriptions. She definitely has shingles. And I was like, what? Shingles? Like, she's 4 and she's never had chickenpox. Well, of course, I've learned now that the fact that she had the varicella chickenpox vaccine means she has the virus in her system. So she had chickenpox, just not how I experienced it as a child. But anyways, he said, I obviously can't write your prescription because I haven't seen her personally, but you need to take her back to the doctor and get them to look at her again and confirm that this is shingles, and get her to take an antiviral medication, because if she took the other one, it would advance the virus and actually cause blindness in her eye because it's on the optical nerve. And I was like, whoa, okay, really glad we got a second opinion. So we took her back in that same day to the pediatrician. My pediatrician was no longer there, so she saw 2 other ones that were there, and we told them like our whole story, and they both looked her over, took all the information into consideration, and they were like, yeah, this is shingles. And I was like, okay, great. So I'm really glad I didn't just follow my doctor's opinion and fill the prescriptions and get them filled and blind her. So that experience just told me, first off, that I needed to trust my motherly instinct more. And secondly, that doctors don't know everything. Not that they're bad humans, that they just don't know everything. And I think a lot of that, in hindsight and all the research I've done now, has a lot to do with their training. But anyways, and side note, this is a little bit ironic. They say that shingles aren't contagious. And I understand it's like the chickenpox virus, like, coming out of your body again, whatever. But my husband got shingles 2 weeks after that. And then I got shingles 2 months after that. So it was just really strange. And we've never had shingles since, but it was just the weirdest thing. They're like, no, it's not contagious. And yet all 3 of us had it within a couple months of each other. So I just thought that was really weird. Anyways, fast forward to my 3rd being born. And at first, he was perfect and it was wonderful. He came out at 9 pounds, super healthy boy, lovely. Well, things kind of went downhill after that. So first couple weeks, everything seemed fine. At the time, we were set on circumcision. That's a whole nother story. I won't get into that today, but we had taken him to this pediatric surgeon to do his pre-op appointment for circumcision. And, they weigh little babies like every time you take them anywhere. Well, he went in for his actual procedure the following week, and his weight had gone down. And I said, well, that's weird. Something must be wrong with your scale. And let me just say, the nurse was not, she was new. I'm just going to leave it at that. She was new. And so she was turning the scale around and turning him around and pressing all these buttons. And she was like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, we'll just leave it up to a fluke. whatever, that it's the scale. Okay. Well, then we get to his 1-month appointment at the pediatrician, and we take him there, and his weight had gone down again. And I was like, this is so weird, because the first 2 weeks he was gaining weight, and because he started at 9 pounds and he got up to like over 10 pounds. But now he's like, I don't remember exactly where he was, but he was losing weight. And I told the pediatrician this. He's 1 month old now, or like 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, somewhere in there. And she said, this is the same pediatrician, by the way, who had that whole, 3 prescriptions for my daughter. And she said, well, he probably has acid reflux, and that's probably why he's losing weight. Does he spit up? And I'm like, yes, but note, all of my babies have always spit up because I have a lot of milk. I am a literal cow. So that doesn't surprise me. But I have all this milk, like they shouldn't be losing weight. So she says, oh, it's acid reflux. Let me write him a prescription. He'll be fine. Yeah, and different scales can kind of be off. So like, no worries, like he's fine. Okay, so again, now I have like 2 doctor's offices telling me that he's fine. So this is 2 different doctors, 2 different times within 2 different weeks telling me that he's fine. And I'm like, okay. Well then, I end up going to visit my grandparents so they can meet him. And they're like 6 hours from here. And he literally cried like the entire time. The whole trip there, he cried all night. He cried all the next day. He cried all the next night. Like I could not. And my granny, she was like, Kayla, should we take him somewhere? Should we take him to the hospital? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure what's wrong. I mean, he doesn't have a fever. And that's the thing. He didn't have a fever. So it was just like, I don't know. I don't want to go to a hospital. I'm by myself. My husband's not here. Like, I don't feel good about it. And so I just prayed really hard. And I was like, Lord, like, please just calm him down, like help him. And everybody was trying everything. We tried like, what's that stuff called? The tummy drops, the gas drops, whatever those are. We tried everything and like nothing was working. Well, the next day when I drove home, I think honestly, he was just so tired from crying so much that he slept pretty much the whole way home. So I was grateful for that. But again, once he slept, I was just kind of like, okay, like he's fine now. Well, then later that week, I was looking at him in the mirror one night and I was holding him in my bathroom and I was like, oh my gosh, like his whole body minus his torso, like minus his chest is purple, like legit purple, like that marbly, modded, like, but it was like super intense and it was so freaky looking. It just didn't look like he was okay. And so I told my husband, I was like, come look at this. Like, look at this. Is he okay? And we started like looking. Well, we called this nurse on call and she was like, you need to bring him in because it could have something to do with his oxygen levels and da-da-da-da-da, maybe his heart, la-di-da-di-da. And I was like, okay. So my mom comes over to watch the other 2 kids. We take him to the emergency room and he's 5.5 weeks old at this point or something. Yeah. And I'm in the ER, the pediatric version of the ER. And they test his oxygen and his oxygen's fine. They put little like heart monitor stickers on him, testing his heart, and his heart is fine. And they're like, he's fine. But it was another doctor, so they weighed him. Well, they weighed him and he had lost even more weight. And I said, guys, he's losing weight. And I'm pointing this out to the doctors. And, they're like on-call residents or whatever. And I'm just like, he's losing weight. That's less than he weighed at his pediatrician's office, which was less than he weighed at the circumcision office. Like, he keeps losing weight. And they were like, oh, he's fine. His heart's fine. His oxygen's fine. He's fine. You guys can go home. And I'm like, you're not going to do anything else? You're not going to test anything else? Like, is there anything else you can test? And they were like, no, like, he's totally fine. You just need to relax. And I'm like, Okay, and I'm not an anxious mom. Like, I'm not one of those, like, hypochondriac mothers who worries and, like, checks on their kid to make sure they're breathing all night. Like, that's not me. But something was wrong with him, obviously. But it just, like, nobody was listening to me. So then I go to my 6-week checkup at the birth center, and I bring him with me, and he's lost more weight. And I'm telling them this whole story, and they're a lot more empathetic to everything, but they're like, do you think it's some sort of allergy? Because at this point, his diaper was looking kind of weird. He was having like green in his poop, and they were like, you know what? I bet it's some kind of dairy allergy. Have you upped your dairy? And I was like, yeah, I've been having a lot of dairy. And they're like, why don't you try cutting out dairy and seeing if that helps his stomach and his fussiness and his bowel movements and his spit up, like all the things. Okay, I'll try it. So I cut out dairy, which I know it takes a while to get out of your system, but by the end of the week, his poop did look better and he wasn't as fussy. And so I was like, okay, maybe he's just allergic to dairy and that's all this was. Well, but again, mind you, he's lost weight now at 4 appointments, okay? So that was 4 appointments in a row where he weighed less than he did at the appointment before. So then, I will never forget this, we went to the zoo. We had planned to go to the zoo with my kids. It was like a big deal. It was in August. And you would think in August it was going to be really hot. Well, it was 55 degrees when we got there. It was the weirdest, like, cold snap in August. And Jensen is the name of my son. He looked, this is all I can describe him as. Okay, this is just to get a picture in your mind. The Little Mermaid, the original cartoon, okay, 1990s Little Mermaid. You know, Ursula's lair, where she has like all of her trapped souls, and they look up at you with those googly eyes, but they're like so scrawny and look like they're dying. That's what he looked like. We took a picture of him, and I'm just like, he just looks sickly. And my mom was there that day, and when he was crying, it was like he couldn't cry. It was like he was trying to cry, but he couldn't cry. Couldn't keep his mouth closed. He couldn't keep his eyes closed. It was like he had no muscle tone and no control. And honestly, I should have taken him to the doctor that night. I don't know why I didn't. I regret that still. But anyways, it was just the saddest thing. And I just remember holding him and crying and being like, what is wrong? It ended up pouring the rain at the zoo. We ended up leaving early, but it was a crazy night. So then I made an appointment with a lactation consultant who I actually knew previously. She was a friend of mine before, and I took him to her on that Monday morning. And I gave her the whole story. I told her everything, start to finish. And she was like, something is wrong. She was like, clearly something hasn't been diagnosed yet. She was like, because a dairy allergy wouldn't do all of this. And so she weighed him, which he had lost weight. He was down to 8.5 pounds. And this is at 7 weeks old. And he was born at 9 pounds. And then I nursed him. And then she weighed him again, and he only gained 1/2 ounce. And I had nursed him for like 20 some minutes. And so she goes, okay, he's not getting enough milk. Like, something's going on. Let's check his latch. Let's check this. Like, we checked all the things, and she said, it's possible he has a tongue tie, and his tongue is just preventing him from getting enough milk. Well, she refers us to this dentist, who is in the area who can help with that. So we go over there to the dentist later that afternoon. And mind you, I'm by myself. Like, Brinkley, my daughter's at school. My other son's in daycare. And I was by myself because I was on maternity leave still. And I called my mom and I was like, Mom, can you just come with me? Like, because my husband was at work. And I was like, I just need someone to come with me. I am so tired. Like, I'm so exhausted. I don't know what's going on. Like, I just need you to come with me. So my mom met me there because during that day I was like feeding him with a syringe because he just was not getting milk. So then the dentist, I take him there and he says, okay, your son does have a little bit of a tongue tie, but he said, I don't think that's what's causing all of his issues. And he said, but I'm looking at your son and he's like, I see so many babies all the time. And he said, your son is sick. Something is wrong with your son and you need to take him back to the pediatrician and do not leave there without an answer. Okay. So then my mom and I drove straight to the pediatrician's office. We did not have an appointment. We just walked in and demanded to see whoever was there. And we got like the newest person. And she was really sweet. But again, we tell her the whole story. We go through all the weight loss, emergency room and birth center and like all these things. Tell her everything. And she's like, well, I'm stumped. Like, I have no idea. So she gets second opinion, third opinion. No one has any idea. And they say, we think you need to take him to the hospital. They can draw blood there. They can see if anything's going on with his blood and to see, like, they said, if anything, they can give him IV fluids and watch him overnight and just kind of like perk him up. And I was like, okay. So we go straight to the hospital. Of course, I'm calling my husband and filling him in because he has our other kids by this point. So glad my mom was with me. And we get to the hospital and they draw blood. And I mean, the questions, like all the questions. Did he have water? Are you sure he didn't have water? Did he do this? Did your other kids maybe do this? Did they do? And it was just like, no. All he's had is breast milk. The only person he's been with is me. Like, please, just like, what is going on? Well, eventually they came in and told us that all of his hormone levels were off and that he was wasting sodium and that his body couldn't retain it. And he was basically, they gave him the diagnosis of failure to thrive. Later, we learned that it was actually his actual diagnosis. It was called transient pseudo-hyperaldosteronism. That's what it was. So if you know what that is, that's what he had. I won't take the time to explain it all, but so anyways, basically he spends the whole week in the hospital. He's on fluids. He's on IV antibiotics. I would not let them give him formula. I was firm on that. I continued to breastfeed and bottle feed him. We had learned that basically he'd weaned himself because his muscles were so weak that he couldn't properly latch and suckle the way he was supposed to. So my body thought he was like kind of done. So I had to like weigh up my milk supply after that and like pump after every session and bottle feed him after every nursing session for like weeks and weeks and weeks. It was more exhausting than any of the initial newborn phases. So anyways, we're in the hospital all week. It's all these tests done. And the end of the week, they go to send us home. He's looking better. He's doing better. He's on medications. He had a UTI. He had, I mean, it was crazy. It was, in all honestly, like, I could tell you every detail, which I'm sure some of you feel like I have, but it would take 10 times as long. But anyways, we're getting ready to go home and they say, we're going to take him off of the IV antibiotics. We're going to give him an oral antibiotic that you're going to continue to give him at home. But we're going to give it to him here and we'll watch him for like 15 minutes to make sure he's not allergic to it. And then you guys can go. Well, they give him this oral antibiotic and within, again, a very short amount of time, his face swells up. He turns red. He gets rashy. And I'm like, okay, I think he's having an allergic reaction. And I pull in the resident doctor who gave it to him and I said, look, like he's having a reaction to this. And they said, no, he's fine. Like, it's no big deal. Like, he's breathing, like, he's okay. And I'm like, ugh. So we're supposed to give it to him again that night and again the next morning. Well, by the next morning, he looked like a hot air balloon and his face was like tomato red and he had rash. And I was just like, no, he is allergic to this. So I take him into the pediatrician. By the way, the same pediatrician who told me that nothing was wrong with him. And she was like, oh, okay, guess he is allergic to this. We'll just write him a prescription for a different antibiotic and it'll be fine. Well, because of all the stuff he had been going through, he has to get blood draws like every other day. So I'm taking him back to the doctor every other day to get blood draws. Well, I get a call like however many days later, and they're like, don't let him take the antibiotic. His liver is failing. And I'm like, what? They're like, it's too strong for him. He's not allergic to it, but it's causing liver damage and you need to get him off of it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I'm just so frustrated at this point. And so like with all the blood draws and all the doctor's visits and everything, like it was so overwhelming. So needless to say, after that experience, doctors were getting less and less of my trust, and my gut was getting more and more of my trust. And also, by the way, this son of mine is now 4 years old, but he is our bubble boy. He has so many allergies to everything, like environmental and food. And after all of my research, I'm convinced it was all the antibiotics he was on in his infancy that just like wiped out his gut microbiome, why it was developing. And he has nothing. So he's allergic to the world. And that's been like a whole nother roller coaster of life because none of my other kids have allergies like that. So it's been crazy. Okay, if you're still with me, awesome. Now, fast forward about 6 months after that whole experience, and boom, COVID. Okay, lockdowns, mass media brainwashing, utter insanity. So, as much as I hated everything about COVID, there were two positives that came out of it. One, curbside pickup literally everywhere, which with lots of small kids was a total win, by the way. And two, it woke me up to all of the things going on in our world that I was so asleep to before that. Once COVID started, things just never felt right to me. They always felt really fishy. Like in my gut, I was just like, something is not right here. And we didn't watch the news because we knew it was trash and propaganda. And how much others bought into it was insane to me. But during all of this time, I really learned to research well, to really, really do my research, to follow all of the trails, to see who was paying who to say what and why, and who was profiting for it, and who was funding this article, and who did they work for, and on. And basically just learned that everything was about money, which shouldn't surprise anybody, but it is. I vividly remember one night, it was like April of 2020, I was so overwhelmed with like all of the things I was finding out that like I could not sleep. And I just started playing worship music in my living room. And I just kept my Bible open because I felt like my mind had been consumed by all of these like demonic things happening in our world. And I needed Jesus to ground me. I needed him to show me his goodness again, to give me peace and to comfort me, because like thinking about all of this evil essentially that I was finding out about, it really was messing with me. So I really started having to distance myself and to kind of stop researching and just learn, just to trust my spiritual discernment of situations. During these months, I went to a friend's house to really learn why she did not vaccinate her children, because now my interest was super piqued. And this was a different person from the one I had met several years before. But that night my friend and I were at her house, and she explained her story. And then she went on to answer every single question I had. And after I left, I remember telling my husband everything she told me and agreeing with him that we would keep researching because this is something we definitely needed to look into. I read more books that were not being advertised by anybody, but they definitely existed. And just in that time, like learning all about how far like the big higher ups will go to silence the truth, like that just made my stomach churn. I was listening to podcasts, I was watching videos, I was researching, who was creating them and who was paying them and what their real agendas were and all the things. We just kept praying and we just kept asking the Holy Spirit to guide us in this decision. And He really did, through a series of confirmations. And ultimately, like the largest feeling of just supernatural peace when we made our decision, we decided from that point on, nobody in our family would ever be vaccinated against anything ever again, no matter what it was. And learning the truth will really do that for you. And newsflash, I no longer thought that lady from 10 years ago was crazy. And I wish I had listened to her and asked her a bunch of questions 10 years ago. So during all of this time, I was not actively attending births. Like I would go to like 1 or 2 a year, but I was working at my church at the time full time. So I couldn't like be on call. But birth still remained such a passion for me. I started connecting the dots of everything. I started like thinking about learning several years before how birth in America was really just a money-making industry. It amazes me that it took me so long to realize that everything was just a money-making industry, like pharmaceuticals, the food industry, like everything. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that all doctors or pharmacists or people who work for these organizations are inherently evil. I'm not saying that. I'm convinced that the vast majority of them believe in their hearts that they are doing what's best. But just like I didn't know any better until others told me or until I experienced these things for myself, neither will they. And the higher ups make it really, really hard for people in general to believe anything other than what's fed to us, like through the mainstream media and through the doctor's offices and the CDCs and all the corporations. I will say now in 2023, we've actually had another child since then, and he was our first home birth, which that was all during COVID. And again, if you keep listening to the podcast, you'll eventually hear his story. Oh, and I'm pregnant again with our 5th. So there's that, another home birth in the works. But we've continued to make just more and more changes as a family, just by learning through others that we're in relationship with who know more or have been living holistically longer. We've just made changes, like we're using homeopathics, we're using natural remedies whenever and however we can. We're growing our own garden, albeit a humble one, considering the serious lack of sunlight we have in our yard. But we have our own chickens now. I finally learned the art of sourdough, and now I ferment all of our bread and baked goods and anything I can, really. We're outside as much as possible, getting as much sunlight as we can, without sunscreen. Although sometimes I'll put some of, I think we use Pipette is what it's called, like the non-toxic sunscreen, on the kiddos' tender spots, like, their noses are below their eyes or tops of their shoulders. If we're going to be exposed like all day long, like all day at the beach or all day at the pool or something where they're not going to get shade time. I've gotten rid of every synthetic fragrance in our house and all the dyes, including food dyes. And I make all of our laundry detergent and hand soap and shampoo and dishwashing detergent and like all this stuff. And then, we drink raw milk whenever we can afford it. I think my goal one day is just to have one cow. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. It seems nice. But anyways, we're not legalistic. We've just learned a lot. And when you know better, you do better and you make changes. I believe God gives us grace for when we're living in ignorance. But I believe once He's allowed us to see more truth, then we're held accountable for those truths. our family is not perfect by any means. I mean, like, my kids still love Chick-fil-A. They ask for mac and cheese all the time. Whenever they're at someone's birthday party, they seize the day with all the treats and the food dye. And I still have, a cookout milkshake if I can't get my heartburn to die down, because for some reason, a cookout milkshake will fix it for me every time, and other things too. But we're trying. We're trying to lead healthy lives. We're trying to raise healthy humans. That's really our heart. And we're just trying to be more intentional and relational as a family. Lots of other things I could get into, but it would kind of be more of a tangent, so I won't. But when I teach childbirth classes, which is like my passion, my heart, like one of my absolute favorite things to do in life is to teach childbirth classes. It is my heart to inform my clients on all of their choices, on all of the risks, on all of the benefits, so that they can pray to God and make the best choices for their family. I don't want anybody walking away from my class not knowing something and then experiencing birth trauma because of it. Like, I want them to feel fully informed and fully empowered to know that they are in charge of making the decisions for their birth so that they can enter their births confidently. Like, I wish I knew what I know now with my first baby and my second and my third. But again, God is gracious, and I'm just glad He's taken me this far on the journey, and I'm sure I will only learn more as the years go by. I think that about sums it up. I'm sure I gave too much detail in some parts and not enough in others. Feel free to reach out with any questions. I just wanted you guys to see how I used to just go with the flow. I used to just, go to appointments and do whatever my doctors told me. And again, not that doctors are bad. We need doctors, and they are life-saving in many situations. But God was just showing me that I needed to trust my motherly instincts, and that there are other ways, and sometimes much better ways, to take care of my family and to give them what's actually genuinely best for their bodies, instead of just fixing a symptom temporarily. But healing them from the inside out as a whole body. And it really just sort of interweaved with birth too, because that was sort of my first experience into realizing that everything isn't as it seems. So anyways, not any other episodes really are going to be like this. This was just sort of a get to know me. This is who I was. This is who I am now. And now you know. But I hope you continue to tune in. I hope you continue to listen mostly to birth stories. We will have people on here talking about different topics surrounding birth. But the majority of the episodes will be birth stories. So I hope you're excited to listen to those and just see how Jesus really moves through people's pregnancies, labors, deliveries, postpartum, how He just really, truly meets them in those places and just lifts up all of our faiths. Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting subscribe. Also, we'd love for you to leave a review of the show so that more people like you can hear more stories like these. If you're local to the Triad of North Carolina and seeking childbirth classes, birth consultations, or a birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to our website for more information. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. Also, if you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to get in touch with me. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.